Hey everyone, we know that for the live portion of this, we didn't give much notice, and so we've been talking about this for the last week of doing a show, but we've really had to put our heads together and talk to different people to get to a place where we are now. So I also apologize for the background noise. We had a planned joint Jesse and Joe family weekend getaway. And so just the kids are inside. There's noise all around. I'm sitting outside just to create a little bit of separation. So anyway, for those of you that are hearing birds and seagulls, that's what's going on. So most of you that watch our show, we appreciate it, but we also know that that you know us to some degree. You know of us. You've come to know us. And so let me just start by saying that we're committed to staying vulnerable and authentic. I'm also going to apologize in advance because there's almost no doubt that something we say on this broadcast is going to possibly be wrong, possibly be offensive, maybe upset somebody. I have biases. Jesse has biases. I think we all have biases. And so just know for that, I am sorry. All right. That our intention truly is pure and good. We are genuinely doing this from a place of love. And, but I just feel like we can no longer sit back and just watch everything happen and not address it from our point of view. And so also, you know that Jesse and I are cops, right? We have been for quite some time. In fact, I was just talking to Jesse about it this morning, and this month marks 20 years for me in service. Four with the United States Marine Corps, where I met Jesse 20 years ago, and then hoorah, brother, and then ever since I've been with the police department, and so 20 years of service, and so we've been doing this quite a long time. And Jesse, I don't want to spend most of the time talking about the problem, right? I think the country is awake. I think the country is aware. People are paying attention. We are very, very familiar with what the problem is. Now, most people won't agree or see eye to eye on it. In fact, we know that they don't, right? I mean, sadly, I think just because of the way of the world right now, we are we're quickly divided, and we're quickly forced into picking one side or the other, and it's getting harder and harder, it seems, to find this like mutual ground, because if you're not with this camp, you're automatically with this other camp. And I just it's frustrating, but it is what it is. And with how quickly information is spread and shared with social media and just the constant consuming of information from different sources, people are overwhelmed. So Jesse, how are you feeling about everything going on?
Uh, so I kind of mirror everything you say, Joe. The first thing I want to do is one, apologize to our viewers. Right, we're not operating in our normal studios, so our conditions are a little different, right? But we're making do, and we are committed to doing the show weekly. And on the way over here, Joe and I had a lot of time to think, and like, people keep asking us what we think about this. We keep, we have our posts on social media, and we, we offer our perspective, from our own personal pages, but not as an organization and not fully for ourselves. Usually it's in definition or just support, but without any context. And Joe and I really thought we should do that. So one thing I do want to say is this is our expressions of ourselves and organization. It doesn't represent any government entity or our personal day jobs or anything, right? This is strictly from us. And we don't want it to be anything critical. We want it to be an open discussion to try to just bring things back to center. And Joe and I have been saying this for years. We're so polarized. So that's really what this discussion is about. And we're probably going to say something that someone's not going to like. People are heated right now. There's so much emotionally charged, and rightly so. But I think when people are emotionally charged, we talk about it in de-escalation, how we say, like, the more emotions involved, the less logical people become. So you want to bring down our emotions and bring back up logic. And I think we're in a totally imbalance right now.
Hey Jesse, real quick, I think it's interesting to that point too. it's kind of both ways, because what we learned last year with the film is anytime we showed it to an audience at a theater, they became emotionally raw. And I think that one of the, I really want to talk a lot about hope and how we can rediscover it, find it, have it, share it. But for me, part of the hope is taking that experience from the film, having people watch it, and then they're so open, so vulnerable, so raw. That is the best time to create or influence change. And so my
Absolutely.
hope is that what you're about to say, and that we're talking about finding or being hopeful, is this could be a great launching point for people to find hope. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's good, because that's important. Because we know that with positive emotions, great things happen, right? Um, I guess for me, the thing that comes up, it keeps coming up, is how naive I was in being surprised that we're here right now. And I'll explain why I feel like I was ignorant, or I am. So whenever, like, we know that in 2014 there was a fundamental change in how people viewed law enforcement. There's been several times in history that things have happened, but 2014 was a major event. And what particularly what happened in Ferguson and everything since then, every element. But what I was finding is, over the last half decade or so, there was a consistent theme that I would see across our law enforcement friends and communities, and the social media sites we share. And one thing I did see is, there was always, when something bad would happen and involved a white officer and a young black male, and the outpouring that would happen, the emotional charge, anger, frustration, sadness, officers would sometimes speak up, and sometimes they'd be defensive. And you'd hear things like, I'm not going to speak to anything until I see the whole video, or we don't know what he did beforehand, or hey, we don't know the whole story. I'm not going to armchair quarterback another officer. We weren't there. But I find that interesting,
Or
right? Because
or Jesse, they point out all like the things they've done wrong in their past.
right. Hey, they
And,
had
and
he was
right,
he did his this criminal history. Hey, did you know that this
he was a
whatever?
convicted felon, as if somehow
Right.
that like suddenly makes it okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I found myself guilty of this too, right? As cops, like, we think this way, and we have been. But what's interesting about this case, right? Like, that didn't happen. It was like, even the most conservative, multi-decade veterans of law enforcement, the people that had the most opinions on all things, could not support what happened to George Floyd. I mean, everyone condemned it across the board. So I was so happy to see solidarity across in one thing. No one could defend it on its face. Even the guys that would say, like, "Hey, I'm not going to say anything," or like, we shouldn't judge a book by its like, judge an incident until we know all the facts. Even though, this is the weird part, right? That hit me on the drive over here, is that as cops, that's kind of what we do. Like, we establish probable cause. Like, we see something happening, we make an assessment about it. Sometimes it's subjective, and we put things together to make an objective truth, and we arrest somebody with probable cause. But when it was coming to ourselves, we were constantly defending ourselves. But I can see why, because we spend an entire career being lied to, or people coming after us, our careers, our pensions, trying to, in an effort to get somebody who had done something wrong, they try to, like, you know do a switch around and kind of focus negative attention on us. It's something that's old as time in this profession. But my point is, it didn't happen here. There was solidarity, and I loved it. I mean, I believed it was like this unifying force. But I don't think the world saw it that way, the way we did. And essentially, like, our profession is being blamed for it. And that's the part that breaks my heart the most, I guess, is um, all the cries, like, you know, get rid of police, like, defund the police. All these things are coming out of this. And I really don't think that's a direction America should be headed. And there's so much good work that has been done and left to be done. And I'm just left with my thoughts there, Joe. And it reminds me of why we even got into this. You know what I mean? And I love that how you told the story of how we got into this, but we didn't get into this. We didn't open this business just by chance.
Right. Yeah, no. And so it's interesting. And what Jesse's talking about is pre Solution Point Plus. So before we even started this company, we were fortunate to have an experience, again, as police officers who had some recognition for the good work that we have done. We were invited to go out to Baltimore, and there is a historically all black university, Coppin State University, and they said, hey, we need to do some CIT training here. But what's super interesting about it, so crisis intervention training, right, which is a 40-hour model, something that, Jesse and I have been doing for a very long time. And so they wanted our product there. Right away, when we realized that the training was going to be hosted at this university, and there was going to be law enforcement officers from various agencies around the state of Maryland, we had some angst, like, oh man, like, I wonder how this is going to go. We had some nerves, we had some anxiety about, just fear. Again, ignorance is stemmed from fear, and fear stemmed from ignorance. And so we just didn't know how it was going to be. And again, we're not from that area. And so we will be the first to admit, like, we don't have the experience of being there in that city and dealing with the law enforcement community relationship. And so, like, every time we go to a new place, we talk everything through, we look at everything, and then we say, okay, we're still going to stick to our game plan the way we do it. And here's what was beautiful is we saw for the first time, because they said it, we used these college students, these university students who are all African American, and we put them with the law enforcement officers. And
I'm sorry, Joe. What's even more interesting, right, is that when they found out that this training was going to happen at the university, they were the biggest protesters. They didn't want law enforcement at the campus. And so the head of this group, we invited her to come be a part of this so she could see. And that's who you're talking about. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, she was like the student president or something, right, for this organization. And so she advocated and said, no, this is going to be a positive thing. And so there was reluctance on both sides of it. From the law enforcement officers, from the students, and to bring that, so before we even started the training, we brought them together. We explained what it is that we were doing. We explained expectations, and by the end of the week, it was one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had, seeing and again, in a safe space, because it wasn't during a crisis situation. It wasn't on a traffic stop. It wasn't after a response to a 911 call. This was a safe space where officers were inside of this university, of these students. The students, for the first time, had a positive interaction, oftentimes, with a law enforcement officer from their state. And to see that breakthrough was phenomenal. And mind you, we're there to teach de-escalation. We're there to teach mental health. We're there to teach people, law enforcement officers, how to interact with the public during a mental health crisis. But we saw for the first time, like, oh my goodness, the possibility of this training goes far beyond mental health and de-escalation.
Yeah, it was an indirect positive effect of the training, because those trainings were never meant to have that outcome. But in this case, you saw, like, I mean, in the beginning, you could see the tension, you could feel it in the room. Everyone had like their biases against one another, both law enforcement and the student body alike.
Yeah.
And at the end, I mean, they were hugging and taking selfies together, exchanging stories. And it was in the role plays, in the time together, hearing us talk, and the jokes that, you would tell Joe, and they'd like find commonality on it. The human experience brought us all together. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, super powerful. So we left there blown away, bright-eyed, like, Jesse, there is something that we can do. We should take this training globally. And I'll be honest, I tend to be quite the grandiose thinker. And I said, hey man, let's start a business. We're going to change the face of law enforcement in this country. We are going to take this training concept that we have. We are going to change the way law enforcement is perceived. We're going to change the way law enforcement interacts. We're going to change the way law enforcement operates inside the organization. We are going to make better human beings within this profession. And very quickly, the business was formed. We had this idea, and here we go. We quickly realized that most law enforcement agencies, now when I say most, do not think of just major cities, New York, LA, Chicago, don't think of just major cities, because most law enforcement agencies are not the major cities, right? In fact, most law enforcement agencies in this country are very small, 10 to 15 officers. And so there are so many agencies that aren't the vast mega police departments that often you think about who get the most attention. They historically do not have money earmarked for training, for de-escalation training, for mental health training. And so for them to say, oh, because here's what we got. Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, we love this idea. We just can't pay for it. And it wasn't about making money for us, again, because we have our day jobs, we had our careers, but it was like, hey, we have to at least be able to cover our travel. And even that became a barrier. And so it was like, yeah, we can't pay for your flight or hotel or anything. And so while we absolutely care about the cause, it was frustrating because we were like, I can't fund this on our own based on our salaries with our families and everything else. I would love to. And so we sadly had to like pump the brakes and think about and kind of, talk about what it was that we were going to do. And that's how we ended up going into the private sector. But I think, Jesse, this incident, which again doesn't need to be harped on, we don't have to see the video, you don't have to talk about it, we know what happened, it was absolutely wrong. But I think, again, to the point we were making earlier, is people are now opened, and I think change is coming. Again, I hope that it's not catastrophic change that we're seeing, and there's a cry to defund and a cry to dismantle, a cry to shut down law enforcement. I don't know if people actually want that. I think that that's coming from a place of emotion and rage and fear. Right. Because again, if we're honest with ourselves, is there a problem? Yes. But do we need law enforcement? Or even if you want to change the name, do we need community policing in our country? The answer is yes. We just do. And it doesn't have to be as extreme and dramatic. And I think that there is a lot of work to be done for sure. But I think change is coming. And so now we're like, hey, I think that there's some hope here, because we've already seen it, right? A local Texas company, HEB, committing to donating or to funding $1 million to help address this. Dak Prescott came out, $1 million to help address this. Disney, $5 million to help address this. So people are starting to say, hey, we're gonna provide funding to help this cause. Again, not about making money on the back of a crisis. It's absolutely about helping be a face of change. And that's what we want to do, is get in front of law enforcement leaders, get in front of cadet classes, get them while they're young, teach them a different way to think, a different way to perceive, because I have for a long time had a huge problem with the culture of law enforcement, with the training practices of law enforcement, with how we create these machines in law enforcement. And I have an issue with that. And people who know me know that. And so I think that there's an opportunity here to talk about a better, smarter way to police in this country. And again, these are our opinions alone.
Yeah. So you say a lot of things to unpack there, Joe. I want to touch on a few of them. First of all, like, you talk about how different agencies are different, right? And when I tell people that don't understand this world and they don't understand the concept of decentralization, like when other officers say, hey, don't judge us all by the actions of a few, policing in the United States is highly decentralized. And so we are fortunate enough to work for a very good department that has kind of let us go ahead.
Jesse, no. Before you make this point, though, isn't it interesting that the same thing we say, hey, just because one officer did this terrible thing, don't judge all of us. Yet, think about any time an officer has a bad experience at a Starbucks. And then social media is on fire, like, avoid Starbucks. Don't ever go to Starbucks again.
Bad Starbucks, yeah.
Because they were treated wrong in this one place. And it's like, we do the same exact thing, but we don't want to own it.
By one employee in a franchise of I don't know how many, right? Yeah.
The same thing with these protesters turned rioters. We see the rioters, and now it's like, oh, protesting is bad. Oh, like protest is terrible. And it's like, well, let's not blanket judge everything because the minority are rioting and looting with violence, which obviously we oppose and we're against. But it's just interesting how the same things we beg not to be judged on, we do ourselves.
And you're right. I mean, those rioters are a minority of the group, and it's funny how the ones that have got arrested, and I'll say this loosely, right? It's funny how, and I have more than just my opinion on this. I mean, I could say that I know this, that these rioters, when they get arrested, they don't even have any connection to the cause. They don't even know why they're there, or if you ask them the name of the person that they were advocating for, they couldn't tell you, right? So those are not representative of people that want change or that are upset or anything. So you're right, it cuts both ways, and we need to start looking at ourselves.
Sorry, man. Explain decentral. Yeah,
yeah, no. So let me go back, right? Like, there's also been discussion like what makes you an expert on this, right? You're a cop, you're biased. I agree, I have biases because of my day job in law enforcement, but I have gone to school a lot. You know this, Joe. Both of us have, and I've gone to school a lot, and I'm the type of guy that I didn't just go to get the thing on the wall or the thing that would earn me more money. Like, I went and I squeezed every bit of knowledge I could out of the whole experience. Too much, maybe. So I have a few degrees, and my graduate degree is I have a Master of Science in Criminal Justice and Criminology, right? And outside of the core classes, quantitative analysis, research methods, qualitative analysis, right? Outside of that, every single course was about disparities, racial inequalities across the entire spectrum in all aspects of the criminal justice process. So I've seen the research, been a part of the research, and then I've done the work too. Like, I'm a practitioner and an academic. So I'm not here to brag. I just want to give some position of some authority to talk about this subject, right? So back to the point of decentralization. In other countries, right, you have one organization. It's run all the same from the top down. It's run by one book. It may not be the best book, but it's ran that way, and they're all the same uniform. They do it regardless of neighborhood, environment, city, whatever. It's ran that way. America is not that way. We have a very, very decentralized policing system. That's to say that every city you go to, sometimes even within the same state, everything is different, right? You go to a different state, that's even more different. The differences are greater. So, like an example, in Texas, we have like an entire commission that oversees education and law enforcement. Some states don't even have that. Like, you would be surprised about the variance in decentralization. Then we have different sizes of departments, right? Different types of leadership, right? In some cities, we have strong mayoral candidates. In others, we have weak. We have the city management system. We have counties. We have parishes and others, right? It's so decentralized. So that would be the first reason for you to really think about, is it fair to make an assessment off one behavior or one individual and blanket it? And that's the first thing I try having this discussion for, right?
Well, because of that too, recruiting practices, training academy standards. Like some academies are 8 months long, some are like 6 weeks long, 8 weeks long, very short. And so some of them are just
really good departments, based. 8 months, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's such a difference in just recruiting, hiring, training, and so yeah, Jesse, your point is absolutely on point. Again, not excusing or justifying or defending anything.
No,
it just is. These are facts.
Yeah, we're not defending in any way defending the actions of those officers in any way, or that agency, some of its policies even, right? Like, we're not speaking to that. We're not speaking on the investigation, none of that. But what we are saying is there's a lot to discuss here, a lot to unpack. And we're hoping that we can start the discussion to bring people more to the center, and to let them know too that we care. Like, we care about this topic. We care about this subject more than people realize. Like, I don't think people get like why we even get into this. You said a lot, Joe, to unpack there, and it brings me to the next topic of this. Is I'm often asked this question, and it's so hard to unpack now more than ever, because it should be a simple answer. It should be easy. If people ask me, I have my college students or people I meet, and get in conversation with like people that have views different than yours, different political views. And I often get asked, are cops racist? So it'd be very easy to take offense of that, right? Because you're asking if I'm a racist, right? And what I've learned in the past few weeks that I can say is different is there's a lot of ways to think about this, and this answer isn't simple. And I believe I'm not. I say I'm not, right? And every of my brothers and sisters that wear this uniform, I've seen their actions, and I say they're not. And the way I would ask this is, the way I answer this is, and I don't know if he's even the right answer anymore, is I've never met a racist officer in this country in all the travels we've had, all the places we've been, conferences, teaching, engagements, whatever, right? And just one. And it wasn't anywhere near where we live or where we work. It was far away. And maybe we'll get into that story if we can or not. It's an important story, but that's not the point here. Just one. So I told people, of course there are, right? How could there not be? There's some, but I don't think it's representative of the whole. So what I explain to people is, what I would anyway, is that I couldn't think of a better term, so I'd say we're culturalists, right? And this is where I would kind of expand it. People in law enforcement are idealistic, right? They view the world through a dichotomous lens. There's good or bad, right and wrong, and it's important to, in my opinion, to be a law enforcement investigator or enforcer of law through this. Like, you want to protect the good, you want to get rid of the bad, you want to do a good job, you support law, you are against lawlessness, right? And that has helped us, in my opinion, help things. And it's also made us very critical of certain cultures, right? We may not agree with some of the people that we're dealing with. We don't agree with the way they represent themselves, the choices they made, like how they raise their children, how they speak, how they view us. And we're critical in that. I don't think it affects any of our criminal justice decision outcomes for law enforcement. I think we're very good at separating it, but that still comes across sometimes in the way we communicate. And that's kind of like an underlying basis of what we teach in de-escalation. And the major premise of de-escalation courses is that you have to separate yourselves from your views and biases and just talk to people with respect that you would hope they would, that you would want to receive. But then I start thinking, right? Like, and as I hear people, and I know that as an academic and as a law enforcement practitioner, and I know others, we have facts, we have statistics, we have logical arguments. And I've always been the first to kind of bring them to the forefront and have open discussion with this. But what I'm realizing is that might not be the best thing now. People are absolutely dying to be heard, and we're maybe missing that. So maybe an indirect way, and what we're learning is that, this idea of racism, or what people feel and perceive, is a much socially complex construct that is beyond even our understanding, maybe. And we have to have these discussions if we're going to understand them. So I can see how one side would perceive us so, but I also know that in our hearts, people that wear the uniform and do the job know we're not. And it's in that lack of understanding where all the chaos happens. And I hope I'm making sense to our viewers at all, man. I really do. But go ahead, Joe.
No, I just, as you're talking, Jesse, I think part of it is it might not even matter. And what I mean by that is if somebody is experiencing something, it's valid, right? If somebody feels like we're racist, that matters. Whether it's true or not true, it matters because their perception matters. And that's what we have to be sensitive to, and that's what we have to kind of learn a way to bridge, because again,
that's actually brilliant, Joe. And I'll let you finish your thought there, but I want to say something that's going to validate it. Is there's a lot of research out there, and this research was done even before the social media was here. Mm-hmm. And that's that people experience something called vicarious experience, vicarious trauma, right? Yep. So there's vicarious experiences, and this was done in criminology studies that suggest that, let's say I treat an individual poorly in a law enforcement engagement, right? I assault them, or they have a perceived injustice, I do whatever. It hurts them, right? They have that experience. But when they share it with someone else, that sharing, the person getting the experience vicariously, has been known to have a greater effect than the person that actually got the outcome. What they additionally found is that those vicarious effects are extreme across racial groups, specifically in African Americans and social economic disadvantaged areas. So what I'm saying is sometimes just like one person gets the experience, he tells 10 other people. To those 10 people, it could be worse than actually going through it. Now we're in a time of social media, right? That's magnified. So perception matters. Like we have to ask ourselves, why are these people so upset? Like, why are they angry? Why are these groups so angry? Like whoever's in the protest, right? Like, why are they angry? Like what is fueling them? Where is this emotion coming from? We have to ask ourselves, right? And to your point, Joel, research is telling us that perception is a lot more effectual than reality sometimes. But go ahead, your thought, man.
Yeah, no. And so we have to keep that in mind. And again, it's not about arguing your point or defending your point or trying to become right. I'm reminded of a question that was posed to me in marital therapy years back. And it's like, hey, do you want to be right or do you want to be in love? And I think that we have to think about that from a societal standpoint of when we're talking about defending our case or trying to make your stance or prove. It's like we spend so much energy and effort trying to prove that we're not something that we're being accused of. Just let it go. Like, do you want to be right or do you want to be in love? And what I mean by being in love is like, do you want to find connection? Do you want to get to a common ground? And I think that for me, that's where I want to be. I want to find commonality. I want to focus on what brings us together. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits that I've had through the movie, courtesy of Jen McShane and HBO, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. I think one of those is like, hey, people felt so connected to me through a film and went based on story, right? And they were like, hey, I can relate to you. The amount of people that have reached out, the amount of people that have asked me to come and speak or to say something on behalf of them or whatever it is based on the fact that they felt a connection based on story. And so in my opinion, what I believe that many African Americans are doing right now is they're trying to tell their story. And who are we to say, no, don't give us that version. No, don't say that thing. No, we don't want to hear that. Like, we have no right to say what it is. It's their story. And I saw something yesterday and it said, healing starts when listening begins. And if we're not willing to listen, regardless of the fact if you agree or not, but if you're not willing to listen, then we should have zero expectation that anyone's going to heal from this. Right? So we have to be willing to listen. And there's two things I want to read, Jesse, and I want to just have you kind of get feedback on this. So the first one is from an Instagram post I saw, and it's from It's Jax on BBZ. And he says, reminder to white people, you will continue to mess up regarding racism. So continue to be teachable, open to correction from people of color, and vigilantly monitor yourself for defensiveness and white fragility. You never arrive as an ally. You must continually practice allyship. I love it. It's not about getting it right and wrong. It's about admitting the fact that like the system is wrong. There is a problem globally. There is a problem in this country. If no matter how far out you zoom, there is an issue. And no matter how close in you zoom, there is an issue because there's an issue within ourselves because we all have biases. We all fall under this umbrella of stereotyping or fear or whatever because people don't look the way we do or act the way we do. It's universal. And so it's not about saying I am or I am not. It's about practicing to be better. It's about allowing people to tell their stories and finding commonality, which creates common unity, which is a great way to form community, right? Is by relying on that common ground and having common unity, because that is, again, where we're going to make strides. So do you have any feedback on that one post? And then I have another thing I want to read as well.
No, man, you're absolutely right. And it's tough, right? Because I know that we have so many friends that wear the uniform and they have been going without sleep. I mean, they're putting themselves at heart rate. They've been assaulted, or we've lost people. Officers have lost their lives. So both sides are very emotionally charged, and they have their strong views, But there's power in storytelling, Joe. And the only way we're going to ever listen to each other is if we hear each other's stories. So we hear about, you know, everything that you said from one side, and then there's from our side, you know, you're the reality of it, right? Like when we leave our kids, we don't know if we're going to come back home and all the good things we've done. But we forget because we're so invested in making the job better and making ourselves better that we forget the dark history of this profession, you know, of this country. And for a lot of people, their experiences are real and they've lived in neighborhoods and they've gone through things. And we kind of, it'd be easy for us on this side to dismiss it because, hey, I didn't do that to you. Like, I don't work that way. Right. But like you said,
which
does that
immediately
matter
it's like,
right now?
I can give up
Right.
responsibility. I don't have to be
Right.
a part of
Right.
this. Yes, you do.
Right.
We all
Yeah.
have a responsibility and obligation. And so this is why I love so much that
Obviously,
class I teach.
it's affecting us so much right now. Like it is.
Right.
Like we're talking about defunding departments. We're talking about getting rid of policing. Like, how does that not affect us overall? You're right, Joe.
No, and I love the classes that we teach, and one of them particularly is that ACEs class, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And the last slide I show, I call it the unfortunate family tree, and I show this root system, which sadly is so much of our marginalized communities, our lower socioeconomic status communities. Like, how should we expect? Why would it ever be? What world do we live in where we should have an expectation that people are going to act or live or be a certain way when they have been just completely destroyed from the onset, from birth? I mean, there's so many community programs that support the idea of broken family in these marginalized communities. There's this broken root structure system that I show this tree, and the tree is poverty, violence, incarceration, early pregnancy, all these things that we just sit back and complain about or judge like, oh, look at this problem, look at this problem. Well, yes, because the root system, the root structure is so just, there's no, not no way, but it's very, very difficult. And this is where people have to own to the fact that, yeah, if we have luxuries based on whatever it is, right? Whether it's color, whether it's chance, whether it's luck, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The facts are we have marginalized communities in every city, and understanding that's, again, this is why we have in our own CIT training, we've grown it to where it doesn't matter what community we're in, it's going to connect and relate with people, and it teaches, because it's easy to operate out of ignorance and just turn a blind eye and say, it's not me. And Elizabeth just made a point. I've been saying this for so long. Law enforcement, which is why, honestly, we believe there's so much work to be done in policing. If I were in charge of all the things, I would completely revamp the way law enforcement training academies are in this country. A vast majority of the training, and they would be several months, I would say about 9 months long, and a majority of that training would be focused on neuroscience, human psychology, behavior, connection, communication, and then we would focus also on how to be safe and tactics and all that. But that should not be the majority, because we are not a military in our own cities. That's the way it looks, though. We've got so much money coming down on grants for equipment.
Once you master the communication and human understanding and neuroscience, you can get into all of that later. Like some of the stuff that we're teaching basics should probably be advanced level courses for somebody, and because they're needed, But you reminded me of something also, and it's something you've heard me say all the time, and I'm trying to like bring it back. It'll come back to me. But no, you're, and I appreciate how Elizabeth is always supporting us and helping us out and watching. And I'm reminded, right? You mentioned ACEs and all the things that exist, and they're all different stems of society. And you've heard me say this, right, to many people. I know you've heard me say it many times, is that every societal failing falls at the steps of law enforcement. Absent fathers, broken educational system, broken mental health system, the drug epidemic in America. It falls at the feet of law enforcement, right?
COVID response.
Right. Like, so, and people forget this. And since we're the first face of the representative of all issues in public administration across from federal to even local sometimes, we're blamed for it. And we're the easy bad.
What are we trained on? Local law, city ordinance, tactics.
We're the face of it all, right?
Yeah.
And what people forget, and I often remind them, is a lot of the disparities in the criminal justice system, a lot of that exist, they're real, but the decisions that are made in the criminal justice process are well after an arrest. Yes, we're the key gatekeepers of who we're the first entry, but there's a lot of injustice that happens in the criminal justice process. But for some reason, law enforcement is the symbol of this process.
Yeah.
And we get blamed for it. And I want to remind people that in a lot of ways, it's also unfair to us to try to be able to handle all these societal injustices. And they send us in the way, then we handle it. And not everyone is as professional as others, and it comes out bad. And then all of a sudden, like, it's you guys' fault. What I always tell people is, and I hope I don't want to defend anybody. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just want to foster discussion and remind people that what I've learned more than anything is societal challenges are complex. Societal issues are a Rubik's Cube of challenges. And the only way that we can address them is through discussion and by looking at all sides of things. And right now, when we're so polarized, I think that's what we're missing. Other than throwing the Rubik's Cube back and forth at each other, like, it's jacked up Rubik's Cube because it's your fault, and back and forth. We got to get past that. But thank you, Elizabeth, for asking. Yeah.
No, yeah, and her point, she says, start seeing people, not the problem. This is what I tell every training class that we're in front of. I said, there's two goals. There's two reasons why, if I had to break it down all the way to the smallest level, how are we good at what we do? And it's these two things. We focus on people, not their problem, and we focus on connection, not correction. And that can mean multiple things, whether it's correcting the problem, like correction as in you're physically going to jail. If our goal is seeing the person and seeing connection, and that's the goal, then and remove a little bit of the focus on the problem and correcting the problem, we're going to get much farther. So anyway, there's one more thing I wanted to read that really stood out to me, Jess, I want to share. And this is from Scott Woods, who's an author. And he says the problem is that white people see racism as conscious hate, when racism is bigger than that. Racism is a complex system of social and political levers and pulleys set up generations ago to continue working on behalf of whites at other people's expense, whether whites know it, like it or not. Racism is an insidious cultural disease. It is so insidious that it doesn't care if you are a white person who likes black people. It's still going to find a way to infect how you deal with people who don't look like you. Yes, racism looks like hate, but hate is just one manifestation. Privilege is another. Access to another. Ignorance is another. Apathy is another, and so on. So while I agree with people who say no one is born racist, it remains a powerful system that we're immediately born into. It's like being born into air. You take it in as soon as you breathe. It's not a cold that you can get over. There's no anti-racist certification class. It's a set of socioeconomic traps and cultural values that are fired up every time we interact with the world. It is a thing you have to keep scooping out of the boat of your life to keep from drowning in it. I know it's hard work, but it's the price you pay for owning everything. And I know even that people are going to like feel a certain way. And it's like anytime the word white is used or black is used, it's immediately like, you're offending me. Own what you are, own what you have, right? It's not about right and wrong. It's about common unity. And I think if that's the focus, we can really make strides. And so I appreciate, I also say this, Jesse, and then we'll start to wrap up here. The beautiful thing about this life in this country, especially, is regardless of what you think, what you have, what you don't have, what we do have is freedom of choice when it comes to our perspective and when it comes to our mindset. We do have a freedom of choice because no matter how bad your world is, you can choose to spread love and kindness, or you can spread hatred and fear. Those are choices. Yes, it can be more difficult for others. Yes, it can be easy for me to say. But here's the thing that people also need to understand. While Jesse and I clearly are not black, we're not African Americans in this country, Jesse and I also had a terrible life growing up. We've had abuse. We've had sexual abuse. We've had physical abuse. We've had emotional neglect and abuse. We've had
I've dealt with
problems.
racism in my life. Like I'm
As
a Mexican American.
Yes.
I've dealt with it too.
Yeah. And so it's not about like oppression Olympics and who's had it worse. The point is, your point is valid. If you are angry, okay, you're angry. But now what? And I think to get back to the whole point of we need to have hope. The hope is Jesse and I are absolutely a piece of the solution to move forward. I believe that. I don't think that's arrogance. I don't think I don't think that's grandiose at all. Put us in front of leaders, put us in front of government, put us in front of cops, put us in front of people, first responders, and we will absolutely work towards creating more common unity. We will, because the way we speak about it from truth, from being vulnerable, from our experiences of 20 years of being in these types of professions as first responders, as servants, we get it. And I absolutely believe that we can be a part of this solution, because what's the alternative? We know that what's been happening is not good enough, and we can no longer operate from good enough. And even if it's not the majority, and if a majority of officers are good or a majority of people are good, it does not matter. There's a problem that needs to be addressed, and we would love to get in front of it and do just that.
You know, the quote you said, Joe, is, you know, it reminded me how over these past few weeks I've been thinking, right? It when we hear about racism, right, we've always assumed it or known it to be making assessments because of a person's skin color, or, you know, create an outcome because of a person's skin color, or not liking them because of a person's skin color. But that quote really reminded me of, and I kind of explained my naiveness to this, my ignorance, is that the issue is more complicated than that in all things. But it also makes me feel like that's a brilliant quote. But if it's that bad, what can be done? Can anything be done? And I argue you just provided the answer there, right? Hope, storytelling. I used to think that it was going to be grandiose to have that. I remember when we were first going into Baltimore, and we had that one interaction I told you about, the first time I'd ever met another law enforcement officer with that kind of view openly. Why did he feel so safe telling me that, you know, in that area? And I lost sleep. I was like, maybe the problem is too big to do anything about, right? Like, we should just give up. Like, we can't handle it. And then that, you know, the short time we were there, we saw such tremendous change. And it isn't about like us saying, hey, we're going to fix this. We have just seen how there's power in connectivity. And you've said some very powerful quotes, Joe, and I just saw one this morning, and it was shared by a good friend of mine named Tissa Justice. She's a law enforcement officer, right? She's one of my favorite gingers. She was my academy classmate, and I saw her share this morning, and it says, the purpose of our life needs to be positive. We weren't born with the purpose of causing trouble, harming others. For our life to be of value, I think we must develop basic good human qualities: warmth, kindness, compassion. Then our life becomes meaningful and more peaceful, happier. And it was the Dalai Lama that said that. And in the midst of like what can we do, right? Like, how we live our lives, how we choose, like you said, we have that choice, I think can have influence. And I believe there's a lot of hope for this nation still. I know people are afraid and they're lacking hope. But I think you're right, Joe. So I lost my light, and then Joe lost an
AirPod. Knocked out my AirPod. Yeah,
we're not in our studios, that's for sure. Yeah, my light fell off in the beginning. Poof. Yeah, but
yeah. So
I leave it with that.
Elizabeth's point needs a part 2. I agree. So we are gonna leave. We have had a lot of comments. I haven't shared them, but they are on the Facebook side. I appreciate everyone's engagement. Now she's saying part 3. We plan on expanding this. We've had people giving us all kinds of suggestions of people to have on to continue these conversations. And I believe that this right here, Jesse, is just the start for us. Again, sharing story, owning your own like shortcomings, right? We can't change what we are, but we can absolutely change who we are. And I really believe in that. And so I think this is just a great start. we have to just keep writing this. We have to keep growing this. We have to. So anyone that's still here, maybe please share it. Share it with
please.
everyone you can, and we would love to keep doing these.
I'm super proud of everyone's still committed to doing something positive. So I'm committed to our brothers and sisters that are out there, committed to keeping people safe, regardless of what people think of, say, or them. You know, allowing people to have their First Amendment right protected, keeping the public safe. I'm also very proud of peaceful protesters that are open, engaging conversation, that they're exercising their constitutional rights.
I've learned from a good friend of mine, Bruce Franks. It's not about peaceful protesters. It's about nonviolent protesters. The protest is absolutely to disrupt the peace. And so while we should oppose violent protesting, protesting should be nonviolent but not peaceful. And again, the whole point is to disrupt the peace. And so I appreciate Bruce.
Well, yeah. You're wanting an outcome, right? You want an outcome change, and that is, and it's by its nature adversarial. Bruce Franks would be great to have on the show now that we think about it, right? That dude is a really good guy, and he has a lot to say, and rightly so, and he's doing good work.
Frontline affected, yep.
Yeah. So I'm proud of everybody that's committed to positive change, and we want to be a part of it too.
All right, everyone. Hey, thanks again for tuning in. We love you. We see you, and we will be back next Saturday. More to come. Reach out to us. Connect with us again. Please share this. Thanks.
Subscribe.